4,000 civilians trapped on a dying mining colony, 6 pirate warships blocking every escape route, and a galaxy already preparing for their deaths. But Threshold 9 wasn't preparing to surrender, it was preparing for war.
Ambassador Tholen Vex had been to 4 dying worlds in his career, and he had learned to recognize the smell of one before the shuttle ever landed. It was a particular smell, not smoke, though smoke was usually part of it. Not blood, though that came later. It was the staleness of people who had stopped washing because washing no longer mattered, a food ration past the point of dignity, a fear that had soaked so deeply into the walls of a settlement that no ventilation system could pull it out anymore. He had smelled it on Veshera when the Planetary Council fell. He had smelled it on the orbital cities of Drennic, 3 in the last week before the evacuation order. He had smelled it on 2 other worlds whose names he no longer said aloud. He expected to smell it on Threshold 9. The shuttle dropped through the upper atmosphere of the human mining colony, and the dust began at once. Threshold 9 was a rust-orange world, all iron oxide and silica wind, and the storms that rolled across its surface turned the sky the color of old blood for most of the year. The viewport flickered with warning lights as the shuttle bucked through the descent. The dust scraped the hull, like something alive trying to get in. Tholen sat very still and reviewed his briefing one more time. The numbers were what they were. Pirate warlord Karzec the Red, 6 warships, blockade established 11 days ago. The human colony of Threshold 9, population approximately 4,000 civilians and 140 militia. Defensive armaments, minimal. Galactic Council assessment. The colony would fall within 7 to 9 days. Relief fleet estimated time of arrival, 14 days minimum. The math, as the briefing put it, was not in the colony's favor. His official orders were to observe, to document the fall, to negotiate humanitarian terms with Karzec for any survivors. He had done this 4 times before. He told himself, good at this work. The shuttle touched down on a battered landing pad on the edge of the colony. Tholen gathered his data recorder and walked down the ramp into Threshold 9. The first thing he noticed was that the smell was wrong. He stood at the bottom of the ramp for a full 3 seconds, his nostrils flaring under his breathing filter, and tried to identify what he was sensing. The dying smell was not there. The air smelled like work, like oil and welded metal, and the faint sweetness of cooking food drifting from somewhere inside the settlement. It smelled like a place that was still functioning. 3 human workers in dust-stained orange jumpsuits were unloading supply crates from a cargo lifter on the next pad over. One of them was singing under his breath. Tholen could not make out the words. A small open-topped runner approached across the pad. The driver was a young man with a rifle slung across his back. The passenger was a woman in a heavy work jacket the color of the planet itself, her gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, her face weathered in the particular way of humans who had spent decades under hard suns. A teenage girl sat in the back with a tablet on her lap. The runner stopped. The woman climbed out and walked toward him with a stride that was steady and unhurried. "Ambassador Vex," she said. Her voice was low and a little rough. "I'm Helen Ardway. I'm the mayor of this colony. Thank you for coming." She extended her hand. Tholen took it. Her grip was firm. Her palm was rough and warm. "To watch us die," she said. There was no anger in her voice. There was no bitterness. It was a statement, the way someone might say to deliver the mail. She watched his face for a moment, saw whatever was there, and then she smiled slightly. It was the smile of a woman who had decided some time ago that politeness was still worth the effort. "I read the council brief. I know why you're here. I appreciate you making the journey." Tholen did not know what to say. In 4 prior assignments, no one had ever greeted him with such direct understanding of his function. Helen Ardway saved him from having to find anything. "Come with me. We'll do the short version. You can ask anything you want." The runner moved through the colony, and what unfolded did not match his briefing. He had expected the markers of imminent collapse. Empty streets, boarded buildings. He saw none of it. He saw mining equipment. A drilling rig the size of a small building tipped on its side and embedded into a defensive berm at the colony's edge, its mounting hardware welded into a firing position. 3 hauler vehicles driven into the gaps between buildings as armored barriers, their cargo beds filled with rubble. A refinery tower partially dismantled, its plating bolted onto the walls of a civilian shelter. The colony had been reshaping itself, methodically, for days. You have been preparing, Tholen said. Yes. How long? 12 days. Since the moment Karzec entered the system. The runner climbed a short rise and pulled to a stop on a high overlook above the colony's main mining field. Helen got out. Tholen followed her. The view was the entire colony spread out below, and Tholen understood now what he had been failing to grasp from inside the runner. The colony was not simply a settlement that had been hastily fortified. The colony was a weapon. Every road, every ridge, every equipment yard had been integrated into a defensive grid. Mayor Ardway, he said. Yes, Ambassador. By every assessment my council has produced, your colony cannot survive what is coming. I've read those assessments. She turned to him then. The wind pulled at her hair. There was orange dust on her jacket. We are not going to die here, she said. I know that's what your assessments say. I know the math is not in our favor. But I am not going to die here, and my daughter is not going to die here, and the children that Davian is teaching in that warehouse are not going to die here. Karzec is going to come down with his ships and his fighters and his pirate warlord reputation, and he is going to find that we have spent 12 days building him a grave. She paused. The wind kept moving. You're welcome to record that, she said. Word for word. She walked back to the runner. Tholen stood on the overlook for another full minute, the orange dust swirling around his ankles, and watched the colony below him with the dawning awareness that everything he had been sent here to document was wrong. He turned off his data recorder. He suspected, with a quiet dread that had nothing to do with the pirates above and everything to do with the woman climbing back into the runner, that he was going to have to learn an entirely new vocabulary to write his report. The sky above Threshold 9 darkened from orange to deep red as the first sun slipped below the horizon, and somewhere in the colony below, the work went on. The administrative complex of Threshold 9 had been built 30 years earlier, in the optimistic years of the colony's first decade. Tholen was given a small room on the second floor with a narrow bed, a desk, and a single window that had been blocked from the outside with a sheet of mining-grade armor. The room had been a storage closet 2 weeks ago. He set his bag on the desk and sat down on the edge of the bed. Helen Ardway had told him to rest. He suspected she had returned immediately to her work. He suspected correctly. 2 floors below, in what had once been the colony's council chamber and was now the operations center for the entire defense of Threshold 9, Mayor Helen Ardway sat down at her desk and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. It was the longest break she had taken in 11 days. When she opened her eyes again, she was Mayor Ardway again, the woman the colony needed. The desk in front of her was covered in maps. 3 physical printouts in different overlay configurations. 2 tactical slates running live updates from her district commanders. A stack of paper notes from staff who could not reach her by comm during the last hour. A cup of something that had been tea 4 hours ago, which she picked up and drank anyway because it was liquid and she had not had any in a while. Her daughter Kara was already at her station in the corner of the room, the tablet in her lap, her thumb moving in the practiced rhythm of a teenager who had been doing this work for 11 straight days. She was 15. She had not been to school in 2 weeks. She had not asked to go. Eastern District reports the new firing positions are mounted, Kara said without looking up. Tell Vorse I'll walk the line tonight. Got it. In the bottom drawer of Helen's desk, folded carefully in a paper envelope that had been opened and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft, was a letter from her late husband. He had died 4 years ago in the deep shafts. He had written it when their daughter was born, intending it to be opened on Kara's 18th birthday. Helen had broken that promise in her 2nd year of widowhood, on a night when she could not sleep and had needed to hear his voice in some form. She had read it perhaps 200 times since. Her hand stopped on the drawer handle. She did not open it. Not yet. She picked up the next slate and went back to work. In a warehouse 3 streets over, Sergeant Major Davian Kell, retired, was telling a story to 23 children about a fox. The fox in the story was small and not particularly clever, but she was patient. She lived in a forest with 3 wolves who wanted to eat her. The wolves were larger and faster, and the fox knew this. What the fox knew that the wolves did not was that confidence was a thing that could be used against a creature that did not know how to question it. The children listened. They sat in their loose half-circle on the warehouse floor, ages 4 to 12, and they listened the way children listen when they understand that the story is also a lesson. Davian was 68 years old. His left knee did not bend properly anymore. He had 3 grandchildren in the room. He had not picked up a rifle in 11 years. He had cleaned 3 of them last night and hidden 2. The third leaned against the wall behind him because the children needed to see it. They needed to understand that the old man who told them stories was also a man who had spent 30 years doing things he did not tell them about, and that the rifle was not a contradiction. Children, in his experience, understood this kind of truth better than adults. He raised one hand. The children closed their eyes. He waited 5 seconds. He lowered the hand. They opened them. Once more, he said, and this time, listen to the room. Count how many sounds you can hear, not just the loud ones, the small ones. When I tell you to open your eyes, I'm going to ask one of you what number you got to. The children closed their eyes again. Davian watched them. He watched a small boy named Theo, in particular, who had not spoken since his parents had been killed in a tunnel collapse 6 months ago. The boy was 5. His lips were moving very slightly as he counted. Davian raised his hand. The children opened their eyes. Theo, he said quietly, what number did you get to? The room went still. The other children looked at Theo. They knew, with the unerring social radar of children, that this was a moment. Theo held up 4 fingers. Davian smiled, small and slow. For sounds, he said. That's good. That's really good. Tomorrow we'll try for 5. The boy nodded once. He did not say anything, but he had answered, in his own way, and Davian Kell, who had not picked up a rifle in 11 years, decided in that moment that he was going to keep this child alive no matter what it cost him. 200 meters below the warehouse, in a tunnel cut into the deep rock of Threshold 9's primary mining vein, engineer Maya Castellanos was elbow-deep in a drilling charge and humming under her breath. The song was an old one. Her mother had sung it to her when she was small. Maya did not remember the words anymore. She remembered the tune. She hummed it while she worked because her hands knew the rhythm of it, and her hands were the part of her she needed to keep steady. Her hands were steady. They had been steady for 31 hours. She was 26. She had stopped feeling tired about 9 hours ago, and she knew this was a bad sign. And she also knew there was nothing she could do about it because there were 93 charges left to modify, and the pirates were not going to wait for her to take a nap. In the breast pocket of her work jacket, folded against her chest, was a photograph of her younger brother Diego. He was 17. He lived 3 systems over with their aunt, finishing his last year of secondary school. He had wanted to be like his older sister since he was 4 years old. She had not been able to send him a message in 8 days. The pirates had jammed the long-range comm. He was going to think she was dead. He was going to think that for 9 more days, possibly more, and there was nothing she could do about it. Maya set down her tool. She put her hand on the photograph through the fabric of her jacket. She closed her eyes. She breathed in. She breathed out. She picked up the tool. She kept working. In the back of the storage chamber were 3 larger charges she had built last night. In the 4 hours, she should have been sleeping. They were configured differently than the others. She had not told anyone about them. She would tell the mayor eventually. She would not tell the mayor what she planned to do with them. The mayor would say no, and Maya did not want to be told no. On the 2nd floor of the administrative complex, Ambassador Tholen Vex sat at the narrow desk and tried to write his first report. He could not. He had pulled up the standard council template and typed his name and the date and the location, and then he had stopped, because the next field was initial assessment, and he did not know what to put there. The honest answer was, I do not know what I am looking at. In his prior assignments, the framework had always been ready. The population is in panic. The leadership has collapsed. He had written variations of those sentences 4 times in his career, and the words had come easily. The population is calm. The leadership is functional. The civilian infrastructure is being repurposed at a scale beyond what should be possible. He stopped. He closed the template without saving. He opened a fresh file, one that was not part of any council record. He labeled it Personal Notes. Day 1, he wrote, I do not yet know what they are. I will continue to record what I see. He saved the file. Outside, somewhere in the colony below, a horn sounded twice. A shift change. The colony was working. The first night on Threshold, 9 settled over the orange dust. Somewhere in the cold black above the planet, the warships of Karzec the Red moved into position for the assault to come. The alert came at 0347 colony time. Tholen was awake when it sounded. He had not slept. He had been sitting at the desk in his small room with the data recorder dark in front of him, listening to the sounds of the administrative complex settling around him, and he had been thinking about the way Helen Ardway had said we have spent 12 days building him a grave. He had been thinking about it for 6 hours, and he was no closer to understanding it than he had been on the Overlook. Then the alert sounded, and he understood that he was about to find out. He moved without thinking, which surprised him. He pulled on his outer jacket and went down the stairs faster than was dignified, his data recorder clutched in one hand. The operations room was already lit and active when he reached it. He stopped in the doorway and watched. There were perhaps a dozen people in the room. None of them were running. None of them were shouting. The comm officer at the central station was speaking in a low, even voice that carried no urgency at all. Helen Ardway stood at the main tactical table with her arms crossed, and she was reading the screens. 3 pirate gunships had broken from the blockade. They were descending on the eastern perimeter at attack speed. Tholen moved to the wall where Kara was already at her station, her thumbs steady on the tablet, her face set in the particular focus of a teenager who had practiced this exact sequence for 12 days. He did not interrupt her. He simply watched. Helen took 30 seconds to read the situation. Tholen counted. 30 seconds, exactly, while the gunships closed the distance and the room held its breath, and Helen looked at every screen in turn and did not speak. Then she gave 3 orders. Tunnel Section 9, primary detonation on my mark. Ridgeline cutters, prepare for engagement. Eastern District, hold positions and confirm civilians are sheltered. 3 voices answered her. 3 confirmations. Helen waited 4 more seconds, watching the gunships approach vector resolve on the tactical map. Mark, she said. The floor of the operations room shook. Not violently, just enough to register. The shake came up through the foundations of the building from somewhere deep beneath the colony, and Tholen felt it in his secondary lungs before he heard the sound, which arrived a full second later as a low, rolling pressure wave that rattled the armored windows. On the tactical map, 2 of the 3 gunship icons disappeared. Cutters engaged, the comm officer said. 3rd target evading. Hold the cutters on it, Helen said. 11 seconds passed. Tholen watched the 3rd icon weave across the screen. He watched it pull up hard, climbing for altitude. He watched the cutter positions on the ridgeline fire in a coordinated salvo that the tactical display rendered as 4 converging lines of light. The 3rd icon disappeared. All targets neutralized, the comm officer said. Eastern perimeter intact. No casualties reported. Helen nodded once. Stand down to alert posture. I want a full damage assessment from Section 9 in the next 20 minutes. The room exhaled. People turned back to their stations. Kara made a small note on her tablet. The whole engagement, from alert to all clear, had lasted 98 seconds. Tholen found that he was not breathing properly. He stood against the wall and watched Helen Ardway, and he tried to fit what he had just seen into any framework he had ever been trained to use. He could not. He had watched human military operations before, on training records, in council briefings, in the standard educational materials. They had never looked like this. The operations he had studied had been loud. They had involved shouted commands and visible stress, and the particular chaotic energy of people doing something they had practiced but never quite mastered. What he had just watched was something else. It was the calm of people who had practiced something so many times that practice was no longer the right word. Helen turned away from the tactical table. She caught his eye. She did not seem surprised to find him in the room. She crossed to where he stood and spoke quietly. Did you record that? She asked. I did not, he said. I forgot. She looked at him for a moment, and then she did something he had not expected. She smiled. It was small. It did not reach her eyes, which were tired in a way that no smile could touch. But it was real. Get used to it, Ambassador, she said. There will be more. In the deep tunnels, 200 meters below, Maya Castellanos stood at the observation port of Section 9 and watched the dust settle. The detonation had gone exactly as she had configured it. The tunnel charges beneath the gunship's approach vector had collapsed the ground in a wide fissure, exactly when she had timed them to. The 2 craft had been swallowed before their pilots could pull up. She had calculated the timing window at 3 seconds. She had hit it at 2.5. She was grinning. She did not know she was grinning. Her hands had started shaking about 30 seconds ago, the adrenaline finally hitting now that the work was done, and she stood at the observation port with her hands clenched against her sides to hide the shake from her supervisor, who was standing beside her watching the same view. "Good work, Castellanos," he said. "The cutters got the third one." "They did. Good. What are we doing about the southern approach?" Her supervisor looked at her. He was a heavy-set man named Reef who had been her supervisor for 4 years and who had argued against her promotion 6 months ago on the grounds that she was too young and had agreed with the promotion 6 weeks later on the grounds that she had been right and he had been wrong. He looked at her now with the particular expression of a man who had decided that the young engineer he had not wanted to promote was about to become someone he was going to follow into worse things than this. "Castellanos," he said, "when did you last sleep?" "Recently." "How recently?" "Reasonably recently." He kept looking at her. "I'm going to keep working," she said. "We'll talk about sleep when we run out of charges." He nodded slowly. He did not argue. He went back to his own station. Maya stayed at the observation port for another minute. She put her hand on the photograph through her jacket. She breathed in and out. Then she went back to her workbench and picked up the next charge. In the warehouse, the children had heard the explosions. Davy and Kel had felt the shake come up through the warehouse floor and had known, immediately, what it was. He had also known that the children would feel it and would not understand it the way he did, and that the next 60 seconds would matter more than the previous 12 days of teaching combined. He raised his hand. The children, who had been sitting in their half-circle, looked at him. "Eyes closed," he said. "Count the sounds." They closed their eyes. He watched them. 23 small faces, quiet, listening. He watched Theo, in particular. The boy's lips were moving. Davian let them sit for a full minute. He let them count past the rumble of the detonation, past the secondary tremor of the cutter salvo, past the distant rolling pressure that washed across the colony and faded. Then he raised his hand. They opened their eyes. "May," he said, "what number did you get to?" The 7-year-old girl thought about it. 8, she said. "But 2 of them were big." "They were," Davian agreed. "Do you know what they were?" May looked at him. Then she said, very seriously, "The wolves came." Davian held her gaze for a long moment. "Some of them did," he said. "And they aren't coming back. Not those ones." May nodded. She seemed to find this acceptable. She did not ask if more wolves would come. She did not need to. Davian had told them yesterday that more wolves would come. He had told them that the work of a fox was not to kill all the wolves at once, but to outlast them, and May had understood, in the way that 7-year-olds sometimes understood things that adults spent their entire lives failing to grasp. She turned to Theo, who was beside her, and took his hand without asking. Davian watched the boy let her hold it. He raised his hand. The children closed their eyes. He told them another story. This one was about a different fox in a different forest. It was a story he was making up as he told it, and the children did not know that, and it did not matter, because the story was not the point. The story was just the sound of his voice in the dark, and that was the only thing the children needed right now. In the operations room, 2 floors above, Tholen Vex sat down at an empty station against the wall and finally opened his data recorder. He stared at the cursor for a long time. Then he wrote one line, and saved it, and closed the file. "I may have miscalculated something. I am not yet certain what."
By now, Ambassador Tholen Vex realizes something is deeply wrong with the Council's predictions. Threshold 9 isn't acting like a dying colony. Helen Hardway has turned miners, workers, and civilians into a perfectly organized defense force. The tunnels are rigged, the ridge lines are armed, and after watching 3 pirate gunships disappear in less than 2 minutes, Tholen began to understand that Karzec the Red may have underestimated humanity.
The 40 hours that followed the first attack were the strangest of Tholen Vex's career. He had expected the colony to shift into a higher state of readiness. He had expected hardened postures, lockdown districts, the accelerated tempo of people preparing for the next blow. What he found instead was something he had no precedent for. The colony went quieter. Not lazier, not slower, just quieter. The way a runner who had finished one lap and knew there were more to come settled into a steady rhythm rather than sprinting. People worked. People ate. People slept in shifts. The repair crews moved through the eastern perimeter and patched what needed patching. The Ridgeline cutter teams stripped, cleaned, and reassembled their weapons. The supply lines kept moving. Nobody hurried. Nobody dawdled. The colony simply continued. Tholen walked through it for 2 days with his data recorder in his hand, and tried to write what he was seeing. He watched the day shift change to the night shift in the operations room. He watched a quartermaster argue politely with a kitchen supervisor about the ration schedule and resolve it in under 3 minutes. He watched a maintenance team replace a damaged comm relay on a rooftop while a younger worker held a thermal blanket over them to block the wind. He watched 2 militia guards play a quiet hand of cards at a checkpoint and watched both of them stand up, weapons ready, the instant their replacements arrived, and watched the 4 of them exchange 3 sentences before the original 2 walked away laughing about something. None of it matched anything he had ever seen on a dying world. That, he was beginning to understand, was the answer to the question he had been failing to ask. Helen Ardway did not sleep on the night of the second day. She told her staff she would. She told Kara she would. She lay down on the cot in the corner of her office at 0200 and closed her eyes and stayed there for 40 minutes, and she did not sleep. At 0240 she got up, put on her boots, and walked across the room to her desk. She opened the bottom drawer. The envelope was where she had left it. She took it out. She unfolded the letter. She sat down in her chair and read it in the small pool of light from the desk lamp. And her face did not change while she read it, and her hand did not shake while she held it. She had read the letter perhaps 200 times since her husband had died. She knew every word. She read it anyway, the way some people prayed. The letter was 3 pages long. Most of it was about Kara. The last paragraph was about Helen. She read the last paragraph twice. Then she folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope back in the drawer, and closed the drawer. She sat for another minute with her hands flat on the desk. Then she stood up, went to the cot, lay down again, and this time she slept. She slept for 2 hours and 17 minutes. It was the longest stretch she would manage for the next 6 days. Davy and Kel sat against the wall of the warehouse during a quiet hour and watched Theo eat a piece of dried fruit. The boy was sitting next to him, not on his lap, not against his side, but next to him, perhaps 6 inches away, close enough to be in his shadow and far enough to be his own person. This was a position Theo had chosen on the second day of the assault preparations and had returned to every quiet hour since. Davian had come to think of it as the boy's chair. He was not trying to make Theo talk. He had decided, the morning after Theo had held up 4 fingers, that he was never going to try to make Theo talk again. The boy would speak when he was ready. Davian had nothing to do with the timing of it. His job was to be the kind of person Theo could speak to when the time came. And Davian knew, with the certainty of a man who had spent 30 years learning to read other people's silences, that becoming that kind of person was not something you did by trying. He took a piece of dried fruit out of his own pocket. He chewed it slowly. "I had a dog when I was your age," he said. He said it to the air, the way he might have said it to himself, not addressed to Theo at all. Theo kept eating his dried fruit. His name was Patch. He had 1 black ear and 1 white ear. He was not a smart dog. He was a very kind dog. He used to sleep across my feet at night, and he would not move even if my feet went numb, because he had decided that his job was to keep my feet warm, and he was going to do that job. Davian chewed. Theo chewed. I had him for 9 years. He died when I was 14. I cried for 2 days. My father told me I was being foolish. He said it was just a dog. Davian paused. My father was wrong. Theo looked up. It was a small movement, just his eyes, just a glance to the side to find Davian's face. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Davian let him look. He did not turn his head. He kept watching the warehouse door and the orange dust and the soft midday light. And after a moment Theo looked back down at his dried fruit, and a small hand reached over 6 inches and took hold of 2 of Davian's fingers. Davian closed his eyes for a long moment. The hand stayed where it was. He did not move. He let it stay. Maya Castellanos slept 4 hours on a workbench and woke up because someone had set a cup of something cold on her shoulder. She came up slowly. The tunnel lights were dim. Her supervisor, Reef, was sitting on a crate 3 meters away, eating from a metal container with a small spoon. He had clearly put the cup there and walked away to give her time to wake up at her own pace, which was a kindness Maya had not known he was capable of. She sat up. She drank the cup. It was water with something faintly sweet in it. She drank all of it. How long was I out? She said. 4 hours. You should have woken me at 3. I am the supervisor, Reef said, without looking up from his container. I make scheduling decisions. You make charges. We have separate lanes. Maya almost smiled. She pulled the photograph out of her jacket pocket. She did not look at Reef while she did it. She looked at Diego's face. He was 17 in the photograph. He had been laughing at something just before it was taken, and the laugh had not quite faded from his face when the shutter closed. So the picture had caught him in the small private moment of a smile coming down. His eyes were the same brown as their mother's. He had a small scar on his eyebrow from a fall when he was 6. She kissed her thumb and pressed it to the photograph. She put it back in her jacket. Reef was looking at her now. He had stopped eating. He did not say anything. He just looked at her, the way a man looks at someone whose pain he cannot fix and has decided to witness anyway. He's 17, Maya said. He thinks I'm dead. He'll find out you're not. In 9 days. In 9 days. She nodded. She stood up. She went to the workbench. She picked up the next charge. Behind her, Reef watched her work for a long moment before he went back to his food. Tholen sat at his desk on the evening of the second day and tried to write the report he was going to send to the council. He had been trying for an hour. He had 3 sentences, and all of them were wrong. He kept seeing things, in his head, that he had not recorded. The 2 militia guards laughing about something at the checkpoint changeover. The maintenance worker holding a thermal blanket against the wind. A little girl in the warehouse taking a small boy's hand without being asked. He had not recorded any of it because none of it had seemed important when it had happened, and he was beginning to understand, with a slow sinking feeling, that this was exactly the problem. He had been trained to record the important things. He had been trained to identify the markers of collapse, the indicators of strength, the data points that mattered. He had not been trained to record a woman folding a letter and putting it back in a drawer because he had not seen her do it. He had not been trained to record an old man not moving his hand because he had not been there in the warehouse. He had not been trained to record any of the things that were actually happening on this colony, because the things that were actually happening on this colony were happening in the spaces between the data points, and his recorder did not know how to find them. He set the recorder down. He opened his personal file. Day 3, he wrote. They are doing something I do not have the language to describe. I do not think any of my training was correct. He saved the file. Outside, the alert sirens began to sound. He stood up. He looked at the window. He looked at the recorder. He looked at the door. Then he ran. The operations room was already at full posture when Tholen arrived. The lights had shifted to combat illumination, a low blue that was easier on the eyes during long engagements. Every station was manned. Every screen was active. The tactical map filled the central table in 3 layers, surface, tunnel, and orbital, and all 3 layers were full of moving icons. Karzec the Red had committed his entire force. 3 drop ships were descending in formation. 18 ground vehicles were forming up beyond the colony's outer defensive ring. An estimated 400 fighters had begun a coordinated approach from 3 angles. The blockade ships above had broken from station keeping and were moving into bombardment positions over the colony. Helen Ardway stood at the tactical table with her arms crossed and read the screens. Tholen stopped at the wall beside Kara, who did not look up from her tablet. The teenager's thumb was moving in the same steady rhythm it had moved during the probing attack. Her shoulders were not tensed. Her breath was not shallow. She was, Tholen realized with a distant kind of horror, calm. She was 15 years old, and she was watching her colony come under maximum pressure, and she was calm, because she had practiced this, because her mother had practiced this, because every person in this room had practiced this for 12 days, and they were not going to come undone now. Helen began giving orders. She did not raise her voice. She did not shorten her sentences. She gave them in the same tone she had used to discuss the supply schedule the night before, and Tholen watched the room respond to her voice the way a body responds to a heartbeat, automatically, without thought, because the rhythm was the only thing keeping it alive. The first of the blockade ships fired. The bombardment hit the eastern perimeter, and the floor of the operations room shook hard enough that 2 paper notes slid off the tactical table. Nobody moved to pick them up. The comm officer relayed casualty reports in the same low, even voice. The Eastern District commander confirmed the outer defensive line was holding. The cutter teams on the ridge engaged the descending drop ships and brought one of them down before it cleared the storm layer. 2 drop ships landed. The first ground vehicles began their advance. Maya's tunnel charges began to detonate, one section at a time, and Tholen watched the tactical map redraw itself as entire approach corridors collapsed beneath the pirate advance. He watched 2 armored vehicles disappear in a cloud of orange dust. He watched a flanking force of perhaps 60 fighters get cut off by a tunnel collapse and then be eliminated by ridgeline fire as they tried to find a way around it. He also watched the casualty reports come in. The first one arrived 18 minutes into the engagement. Eastern District Commander Vorse had been killed by a direct artillery hit on his forward position. Helen took 2 seconds, no more, and named his second-in-command as the new commander. The comm officer relayed the order. The Eastern District acknowledged. The defense continued. The second report came 12 minutes later. The Ridgeline Cutter team on position 3 had been overrun. 6 dead. Helen took 2 seconds and ordered the position abandoned and its overlapping fire sectors reassigned to positions 2 and 4. The order went out. The reassignment happened. The defense continued. The third report came 9 minutes after that. Northern District Commander Hanley had been wounded badly enough to need evacuation. Helen named her replacement. The replacement acknowledged. Tholen was watching Helen's hand. He saw it tremble for the first time when the third report came in. Just once, just for a fraction of a second, as she pointed at a position on the tactical map and gave the order to redeploy the Northern Reserve. The runner standing beside her saw it too. Tholen watched the runner see it. The runner did not speak. The runner did not look at her face. The runner waited for the order to finish, repeated it back, and went to deliver it. The exchange took 9 seconds and contained more silent understanding than Tholen had observed in 3 years of council diplomacy. Helen's hand did not tremble again. Davian Kell heard the first bombardment from the warehouse and was on his feet before the dust had finished rising from the rafters. The children were already moving. He had drilled them on this for 12 days. They knew the order. They knew the pairs. They knew the route. The 2 younger adults assigned to the warehouse, a woman named Pell and a man named Soto, were already at the back doors checking the secondary tunnel entrance. Davian counted heads. 23. He counted again. 23. He nodded once. Move, he said. The children moved. They held hands in pairs. They walked, not ran, because Davian had taught them that running made noise and noise was what the wolves wanted. May held Theo's hand. Theo's other hand was tucked into the pocket of his small jacket, and Davian could see the shape of it through the fabric, the small fist clenched tight. The shelter was 300 meters down the tunnel. They made it in 8 minutes. Davian got the children settled. He counted heads a third time. 23. He looked at Pell and Soto. He looked at the rifle leaning against the wall behind him. The comm unit on his belt clicked. It was the Eastern Shelter Coordinator. The pirates had breached the Western Shelter Complex. There were 41 civilians inside, mostly families. The defenders at the western entrance had been killed. The pirates were sweeping the tunnels. Davian closed his eyes for 1 second. He opened them. He looked at Pell. You have the children, he said. Pell looked at him. She was 34 years old. She had 2 of her own children in this room. She understood what he was asking. She understood what he was not saying. Her face did not change. I have them, she said. Davian picked up the rifle. He turned to Soto. You stay with her. The 2 of you keep this shelter sealed. If you hear anyone in that tunnel who is not me, you do not open the door. Do you understand? Soto nodded. Davian crossed the room to where Theo was sitting against the wall. He crouched down. The boy looked at him. Davian took the boy's hand, the one that had been clenched in his pocket, and he held it for a moment. I'll be back, Davian said. Theo looked at him. Davian let go of the hand. He stood up. He walked to the tunnel entrance. He did not look back. In the deep tunnels, Maya Castellanos detonated her second surprise. The charge was buried beneath a section of cliff above the southern approach corridor. She had configured it to fracture the cliff face along a specific seam that she had spent 2 days surveying. When she triggered it, 500,000 tons of orange rock came down in a controlled slide onto the armored column the pirates had committed to the southern push. 12 vehicles, approximately 80 fighters. She watched it on the observation feed. Her hands were steady. She was not grinning this time. Reef was beside her. He did not say anything. He just stood there and watched with her, and after the dust began to settle on the screen, he reached over and put his hand briefly on her shoulder. She nodded once. She turned away from the screen. She went back to her workbench. The third surprise was still in the back of the storage chamber. She had not told Helen about it. Not yet. In the operations room, Tholen watched the tactical map and understood, finally, what he was looking at. He was looking at Helen Ardway losing people she had known for 20 years and replacing them in 2 seconds. He was looking at Davian Kell's name disappearing from the warehouse roster and reappearing in the Western Shelter approach. He was looking at Maya's second detonation reshape the Southern Theater in a way that none of the Council's analysts would have predicted because none of them had thought to ask what a mining engineer could do with 12 days and 400 drilling charges. He was looking at a colony that was not surviving by being lucky. He was looking at a colony that was surviving because every single person in it had decided, 12 days ago, that they were going to do their part of an impossible thing, and they were doing it. The outer perimeter breached at 1647. Helen ordered fallback to the inner line. Her voice was steady. Her hand did not tremble. The runner beside her acknowledged the order and ran to deliver it. And Tholen watched him go, and he understood for the first time that the runner was going to die before the night was over. And the runner knew it, and Helen knew it, and the runner had run anyway. The casualty reports kept coming. By 2030, the colony was operating on its inner defensive line. The outer perimeter was gone. The eastern district had collapsed in the last hour of daylight. The northern flank had pulled back to the secondary positions. The western shelter complex had been retaken, though Tholen did not yet know at what cost. The casualty board in the operations room had been updated 3 times in the last hour, and each update had taken longer than the one before it because there were more names to add. 300 civilians. 42 defenders. The numbers were preliminary. They would get worse. Helen Ardway called a meeting at 2045. It was held in the small conference room off the operations center, the one that had once been used for budget reviews. 6 people attended. Helen, her senior staff officer, a woman named Ayer, the new Eastern District commander, Maya Castellanos, who had come up from the deep tunnels covered in dust, her left hand wrapped in a bloody bandage that nobody mentioned, Davian Kell, who had come up from the western shelter with his rifle still on his back, his face gray, his eyes very clear, and Tholen Vex, who had not been invited and who was not turned away. He sat at the back of the room against the wall. He did not take out his data recorder. Helen did not waste time. She laid out the situation flatly. 1 defensive line left. The pirates had taken heavy losses but had committed enough force that they could press the inner ring at first light. Relief fleet still 9 days out. The math, by every measure that had been correct 12 days ago, said that the colony would fall before dawn. She paused. "We are not going to let it fall," she said. "I want to hear your assessments." Ayer spoke first. She had been Helen's senior staff officer for 11 years. She gave her assessment in 2 sentences. The inner line could hold for 30 hours if it was supported correctly. Beyond 30 hours, she could not promise anything. The Eastern District commander spoke next. He had been a deputy 2 hours ago. He gave his assessment in 3 sentences. His district could hold 18 hours. He would need ammunition resupply in 12. Davian spoke when Helen looked at him. "How many children are still alive?" he asked. Helen looked at him for a long moment. She did not look at her notes. She did not need to. She answered him directly. 217, she said. Davian nodded once. "I will hold the inner shelters," he said, "as long as I am breathing." He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Maya spoke last. "I have one more charge," she said. "Permission to use it." Helen looked at her. "What is it?" Maya told her. The room went quiet. Ayer closed her eyes briefly. The Eastern commander stared at the table. Davian did not react at all, which Tholen understood, after a moment, was its own kind of reaction. Maya had built a deep core charge. She had rigged it into the colony's primary mining shaft, the central spine of the entire underground complex. If she detonated it correctly, the surface above the shaft would collapse into the mines below in a controlled cascade. If she detonated it incorrectly, the cascade would propagate through the secondary shafts and take a third of the colony with it. She had calculated the timing. She had calculated the trigger sequence. She had built 3 independent failsafes. She had tested every one of them in simulation. She wanted to draw the pirates onto the surface above the shaft and bring it down beneath them. Helen closed her eyes. She held them closed for perhaps 4 seconds. She opened them. "Permission granted," she said. Maya nodded. She stood up. She left the room without saying anything else, because there was work to do and she had stopped finding words useful about 6 hours ago. Helen looked at Tholen. She had not addressed him directly in the meeting. She had let him sit at the back and observe, the way he had been observing for 3 days now. But she looked at him now, and she waited, because she had clearly decided that he had earned the right to ask the question that was about to come. Mayor Ardway, he said. Yes, Ambassador. Why have you not surrendered? The room did not react. Ayer did not look up. The Eastern commander did not look up. Davian, who was the only person in the room with any military training above the level of colonial militia, did look up, and he looked at Tholen with a kind of patient curiosity, as though he had been waiting for someone to ask this question and was glad it was finally being asked. Helen did not get angry. She did not get defensive. She looked at Tholen with the same tired patience she had shown him on the Overlook 3 days ago. Karzec the Red does not take prisoners, Ambassador, she said. I have read his record. For colonies on the Rim in the last 6 years. He sweeps them. He kills the adults first. Then he kills the children. Then he takes what he came for. There is no version of surrender where the children of this colony grow up. There is only the version where they die in the same week the rest of us do, or the version where we hold the line long enough that some of them get out. She paused. She looked at Davian. She looked at the Eastern commander. She looked at Ayer. The math is not about whether we win, she said. The math is about who gets to grow up. We have decided who that is going to be.
The Battle of Threshold 9 is reaching its breaking point. The outer defenses are collapsing. Casualty reports are flooding the operation rooms. And everyone knows many of them won't survive the night. But Helen Ardway refuses to surrender. Now, with Maya preparing one final desperate plan, the colony is about to make its last stand.
Tholen did not respond. He did not know how to. He sat against the wall and watched Helen Ardway dismiss the meeting, and he watched the senior staff file out, and he watched Davian Kell pause at the door and exchange a look with the mayor that contained, in its small private silence, an entire goodbye that neither of them would say aloud. Then Davian was gone, back to the shelters. Helen sat down at the table and put her face in her hands for 10 seconds. She got up. She went back to the operations room. In the small hours of the third night, the 4 threads of the story moved through their separate quiet. Helen sat beside Kara's cot in the corner of the operations room. The teenager was asleep, finally, after 18 straight hours at her station. Helen sat in a chair beside her and watched her daughter breathe. She did not touch her. She did not want to wake her. She just sat there, and at some point she allowed herself to cry, silently, for 10 minutes, with her hands folded in her lap and her face still composed in case anyone looked in. Nobody looked in. The crying ended. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She went back to her desk. Davian walked the shelter tunnels. He stopped at every group of children. He told each one of them, by name, that they were going to be all right. He did not promise. He did not lie. He simply told them, with the certainty of a man who had decided what his last day would look like, that they were going to be all right. The children believed him because Davian had never once lied to them, and because the certainty in his voice was the kind of certainty children recognized as real. He stopped longest at Theo. He sat beside the boy for an hour. He did not speak. The boy did not speak. They sat together in the dim shelter light, and at the end of the hour Davian stood up, put his hand briefly on the top of the boy's head, and walked back to his post. Maya wrote a letter to Diego. She wrote it on a piece of paper she had torn from the back of her work log. She wrote it in pencil because she did not have a pen. She wrote it in the corner of the storage chamber where she had built the deep core charge, sitting on a crate with the photograph open in front of her on the floor. She wrote 3 pages. She did not edit any of it. She told him she loved him. She told him that whatever happened, he had been the best thing about her life. She told him to finish school. She told him that she was sorry she had tried so hard to talk him out of engineering, because she had been wrong, because the work was a gift, because doing something hard well was the only kind of meaning she had ever found. She folded the letter. She tucked it into the photograph. She put both back into her jacket pocket. She went to check her trigger sequence one more time. Tholen sat alone in his small room. He did not open his data recorder. He did not write anything. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed, in the dark, with his hands resting on his knees, and he listened to the colony around him. He could hear the operations center 2 floors below. He could hear the distant rumble of the bombardment, which had not stopped. He could hear, somewhere very far away, a child laughing about something, briefly, before going quiet again. He thought about the runner who had died. He had not known the runner's name. He had watched the man take Helen's order and run to deliver it and not come back. He thought about Helen knowing the runner would die, and the runner knowing it too, and the order being given anyway, and the order being carried. He sat in the dark for a long time. The first light of the third day began to lift the orange dust outside his window, and somewhere on the perimeter the pirates began to move again, and Ambassador Tholen Vex stood up from the bed because he had decided, finally, what he was going to do. The final assault began at 0911. Karzec the Red committed everything he had left. The two remaining drop ships landed inside the breach in the outer perimeter and disgorged the last of his ground force. The blockade ships above the planet shifted into close support and began saturating the colony's inner ring with sustained bombardment. The armored vehicles that had survived the southern collapse the day before regrouped on the eastern approach and began their advance toward the inner shelter complex. Helen Ardway stood at the tactical table and watched the icons converge. She had not slept. She had eaten once, 6 hours ago, a piece of bread that Ayer had pressed into her hand without comment. Her face was the color of the orange dust outside the window. Her voice was the same voice it had been on the Overlook 3 days ago. She gave the order to draw the pirate column onto the surface above the central mining shaft. It was not a direct order. It could not be. The pirates had to choose the route themselves. What Helen ordered was a fallback, a controlled retreat by the eastern district that opened a corridor toward what would appear, on Karzec's tactical maps, to be the colony's command core. She ordered Ayer to make the corridor look defended just enough to seem real and undefended just enough to seem inviting. She ordered the cutter teams on the ridge to engage the flanks of the column, but not the head. She ordered the inner shelter complex to hold its perimeter and not pursue. She gave the orders the way a fisher sets a line. The pirates took the bait. Tholen watched it happen on the tactical map. He watched the armored column, perhaps 120 fighters and 6 vehicles, push into the corridor that had been opened for them. He watched them reach the ground above the central mining shaft. He watched Ayer turn to Helen and say, very quietly, "They're in position, Mayor." Helen looked at the map for 1 full second. Then she keyed her calm. "Castellanos," she said, "you have permission. On your timing." There was a pause. Maya's voice came back. It was steady. It was tired. It was the voice of a 26-year-old engineer who had not slept properly in 3 days and who had built something terrible and was about to use it. "Acknowledged," Maya said. 30 seconds. The 30 seconds passed. Then the floor of the operations room shook in a way that nothing had shaken it before. The tremor came up from the deep rock of the planet, a low and rolling pressure that traveled through the foundations of every building in the colony and rattled the armored windows for a full 8 seconds. The light in the room flickered. A coffee cup slid off a desk and shattered on the floor. On the tactical map, the central mining shaft icon went black. The icons of the pirate column went with it. Tholen watched the surface above the shaft collapse on the orbital feed. He watched a section of the colony's main industrial grid, perhaps 400 meters across, drop into the mines below in a single coordinated cascade. He watched the dust cloud rise a kilometer into the orange sky. He watched it spread on the wind and obscure the entire eastern half of the colony for the next 11 minutes. The blockade ships above the planet stopped firing. For perhaps 30 seconds, the colony was quiet. Then the cutter teams reported the pirate flanks were breaking. The Eastern District reported the corridor was clear. The Northern Reserve reported the secondary thrust toward the Western Shelter had stalled and was now retreating in disorder. Karzec's force, what remained of it, was pulling back. In a tunnel observation post 200 meters below the surface, Maya Castellanos stood with one hand against the wall and watched the dust settle on the screen. She did not move. She did not speak. After a long moment, she whispered her brother's name once, very quietly, the way someone might speak the name of a person they wanted very badly to see. Then she sat down on the floor of the observation post, put her forehead on her knees, and stayed there for a long time. In the Western Shelter Complex, Davian Kell was holding the inner entrance. The pirates had pushed at the inner shelter perimeter in the second hour of the assault, before Helen had drawn them into the corridor. A flanking element of perhaps 40 fighters had broken through the secondary tunnels and reached the approach to the children's shelter. Davian had been waiting for them. He had 11 other defenders with him. Most of them were retired militia. 3 of them were over 60. One of them was a woman named Calder who had served with Davian 35 years ago in a unit on a different world, and who had walked into the shelter approach 2 hours ago and asked him, without preamble, if he had room for one more. He had said yes. The 11 of them held the entrance for 3 hours. The narrator does not show the audience what happened in those 3 hours. The narrator only shows what was true at the end of them. Calder was dead. 3 of the retired militia were dead. 2 more were wounded badly enough that they would not be holding anything else for the rest of their lives. Davian had been hit twice, once in the shoulder and once low in the side, and he was still on his feet and still firing because he had decided that he would be on his feet and firing for as long as the work required it, and the work was not yet finished. The pirates broke before Davian did. When the flanking element retreated, what was left of the defenders held the entrance for another 20 minutes to be sure. Then Davian sat down against the tunnel wall because his legs had stopped agreeing to hold him, and one of the wounded militia called for medics on the comm, and Davian closed his eyes for a few seconds and rested. He opened them when he heard small footsteps in the tunnel behind him. Pell was running toward him with Theo in her arms. The boy had heard the comm call. He had refused to stay in the inner shelter. He had pulled away from Pell and run, and Pell had followed because she could not stop him and because she had understood, the moment she saw his face, what he was going to do. Theo reached Davian. The boy did not stop. He did not slow down. He came right up against Davian's side and put both small hands on the old soldier's chest, and he stood there, and he looked at Davian's face, and his mouth opened. Davian, he said. It was the first word he had spoken in 6 months. Davian smiled. It was small. It was the smile of a man who had already decided what the cost of the day was going to be and was glad, in the end, to know what he had paid for. Hello, Theo, he said. It is very good to hear your voice. The medics arrived a minute later. They worked on Davian for 40 minutes. They could not save him. He had lost too much blood from the wound low in his side, and he had been losing it for too long, and he had known, when he sat down against the wall, that he was finished. He did not let go of Theo's hand. He died at 1432, in the Western Shelter approach, with a 5-year-old boy holding his hand, surrounded by the children he had decided, 11 days earlier, were going to live. In the operations room, Helen Ardway lost contact with the Western District at 12:44. The comm went silent for 40 minutes. She did not know if her daughter, who had moved to the Western Shelter at 1100 to help coordinate evacuation traffic, was alive. She did not stop running the defense. Her voice did not change. She gave 17 orders in those 40 minutes, and every one of them was correct, and Tholen watched her do it from his position against the wall and finally understood what he was looking at. He was not looking at a woman who felt nothing. He was looking at a woman who felt everything, all of it, the full weight of every name on the casualty board and the silence on the Western comm and the possibility that her daughter was already dead and who had decided that none of it was going to be allowed to stop her doing the job. Not the love, not the fear, not the grief that was already gathering in her like a tide. She was going to feel all of it, and she was going to keep working through all of it, and she was going to keep working through it because the alternative was that more children died, and she had decided, 12 days ago, what the cost was going to be. Tholen stood up. He walked across the operations room to an empty comm station. He sat down. He keyed it on. He pulled up the tunnel layout he had memorized during his first 2 days on the colony, because memorizing facility layouts was something council observers were trained to do, and he began to coordinate medical evacuation routing. He had never done anything like this in his life. His hands shook. His voice on the comm was unsteady for the first 10 minutes. The medic teams on the line did not know who he was. They followed his routing anyway because the routing was correct and because Helen Ardway, when she saw him at the station, had simply nodded once and let him work. He worked for 6 hours. The Western comm came back at 13:24. Kara was alive. The shelter had taken a direct hit. 11 civilians were dead. Kara had been in a side corridor when the impact came and had been buried under collapsed shelving for 3 hours before a rescue team had pulled her out. She had a broken arm and a concussion. She was alive. Helen received the report. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. She gave the next order. The pirate assault broke at 16:11. What remained of Karzec's force, perhaps 60 fighters and 2 vehicles, retreated to the last drop ship in disorder. The drop ship lifted at 16:38. The blockade ships above the planet, having lost their ground commander and most of their fighting force, pulled out of orbit at 1701. The colony was alone. The relief fleet was still 9 days out. They would make it now. The colony began counting its dead in the gray morning of the fourth day. 683 names. Ayer compiled the list herself, by hand, in a paper ledger because Helen had asked for it that way. Helen read every name. She read them at her desk in the operations room with the door closed, and she did not allow herself to skip any of them. And when she came to the name Davian, she stopped for a long moment and then kept reading. When she came to the name of the runner who had died on the second day, the one whose name Tholen had never learned, Helen paused again. The runner had been 23 years old. His name had been Theron Vass. Helen had attended his naming ceremony when he was an infant. She finished the list. She closed the ledger. She went to find Theo. The boy was in the colony's medical center, sitting on a chair beside the bed where Davian had died. The medics had moved Davian's body to the morgue, but Theo had not left the chair. Helen had stayed with him. She had brought him food, which he had not eaten, and water, which he had drunk. She had not tried to make him leave. She had understood, the way she had understood everything about Theo since the first day of the assault, that the boy would leave the chair when he was ready to leave it and not before. Helen sat down on the floor beside Theo's chair. She did not speak for a long time. She just sat there. After a while, she reached up and put her hand over Theo's small hand, which was resting on the arm of the chair, and the boy did not pull away. He looked at her. "He told me you were going to be all right," Helen said. Theo looked at her. "He was right," Helen said. "He was always right." The boy nodded, very slightly. He did not speak. He did not need to. He had spoken once, the day before, to the only person he had needed to speak to, and that had been enough. He would speak again, in time. Not yet. Helen sat with him for an hour. Then she got up, and she went to find her daughter, who was in a recovery bed 2 corridors over with her arm in a cast and a deep bruise across half her face. And Helen sat with Kara for another hour, and she did not say very much during that hour either, because there were not very many words that mattered and Kara already knew all of them. Maya Castellanos came up out of the deep tunnels for the first time in 3 days at mid-morning of the fourth day. She walked to the surface alone. She climbed the access ladder slowly because her hands were no longer shaking, but the shake had been replaced by a deep tremor of exhaustion that she did not yet know the bottom of. She emerged into the orange daylight and stood on the broken industrial grid above the old central mining shaft, and she looked at the crater that had been there yesterday and was still settling now, and she sat down on the edge of it. She put her face up to the sun. She cried for an hour. She did not make any noise. The tears simply came, and she let them come, and she did not try to stop them. She thought about Diego. She thought about the letter folded in her jacket pocket that she would not have to send now. She thought about the 417 charges she had built and the 3 larger ones in the back of the storage chamber, and the calculation she had made about the timing window for the deep core charge, which she had hit at exactly the right moment, which she had not been certain she would. She thought about the people who were still alive because of the calculation. She thought about the people who were not. After an hour, she stood up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She walked back into the colony. She went to the medical center, and she found a senior medic, and she asked what she could do to help, and the medic looked at her and saw that she had not slept and pointed at a cot in the corner and told her to sleep first. Maya slept for 14 hours. When she woke up, she went and found the other engineers, and she began teaching the 2 youngest ones how to defuse the unexploded charges that were still scattered across the colony, because the children were going to need to come back to the surface eventually, and the surface was going to need to be safe. Tholen Vex walked through the colony in the days after the assault. He did not write anything. He did not record anything. He had decided, at some point during the long night of the 3rd day, that the words for what he was witnessing did not yet exist in any language he had access to, and that trying to write them down before he understood them would only produce another wrong report. He walked. He watched. He listened. He saw Theo sitting beside a small grave on the morning the colony buried its dead. The boy had a piece of dried fruit in his hand. He did not eat it. He held it. He saw Helen Ardway meet with the families of the dead, one by one, in a small room off the operations center. She knew every name. She did not have notes. She did not need them. She had known these people her whole life. She sat with each family for as long as the family wanted, and she answered every question they asked her, and she did not lie about any of the answers. And when one of the families became angry with her for the decision she had made, she absorbed the anger without defending herself, and the family left feeling no better but having been heard, which was the only thing Helen had been able to offer them. He saw Maya teaching two young engineers in the southern tunnels. Her hands were steady. Her voice was patient. She corrected their work without irritation. When one of them asked her a question she did not know the answer to, she said so, and they figured it out together. He saw Kara, with her arm in a cast, sitting at her station in the operations room handling comm traffic. She had refused to stay in the medical center. Her mother had not argued. The relief fleet arrived on the morning of the 13th day. It came down through the orange dust and formation, 6 warships and 4 supply vessels, and the colony watched it land with the quiet satisfaction of a population that had spent 13 days knowing the math had been wrong. Tholen boarded his transport that afternoon. He did not say goodbye to Helen. He did not say goodbye to Maya. He left a note on the desk of his small room in the administrative complex, addressed to the mayor, 3 lines long. He thanked her for her hospitality. He apologized for what his report had originally been intended to be. He said he hoped that one day she would forgive him for arriving expecting to find her dying. He thought about what he was going to say to the council during the entire journey home. The Galactic Council chamber was the largest interior space Tholen Vex had ever stood in. He had stood in it before. He had delivered 4 prior reports from 4 prior dying worlds, and he had stood in the same spot on the chamber floor and used the same procedural language and submitted the same kind of clean professional documents that the council expected of its observers. He stood in the same spot now. He did not have a prepared report. He did not have data slides. He had a single piece of paper folded in his hand, on which he had written 6 lines on the journey home, and he had his data recorder, which contained 3 days of personal notes that he had not yet decided whether to submit. The chamber director announced him. He stepped forward to the speaker's stand. He looked up at the rows of delegates from 31 species. He saw the delegate from the Parati block, the one who had no patience for anything that could not be expressed as a number. He saw the senior council member from his own species. He saw the empty seat that had been reserved, for several years now, for the human representative who would be invited if the council ever finished its long debate about whether humanity was ready. He did not open the paper in his hand. "I was sent to Threshold 9, he said, to observe the death of a human mining colony. The colony did not die. I am here to tell you why." He paused. "I will not give you tactical analysis. You will receive that from other sources. I will tell you what I saw, and I will trust you to understand what it means." He told them about Helen Ardway. He told them about a woman who had been elected to manage zoning disputes and water rights, who had run the defense of a colony of 4,000 people for 13 days against 6 warships and a pirate warlord with a record of taking nothing alive. He told them about her hand trembling once and never again. He told them about her sitting beside her sleeping daughter at 3 in the morning and crying silently for 10 minutes, and then going back to work. He told them about her reading every name on the casualty list in a paper ledger because she had decided that the dead deserved to be read by hand. He told them about Davian Kell. He told them about an old soldier who had not picked up a rifle in 11 years, and who had picked one up on the 2nd day of the assault and held a shelter entrance for 3 hours against 40 fighters with 11 other defenders, most of them retired, one of them a woman who had walked into the shelter that morning to ask if there was room for one more. He told them about a 5-year-old boy who had not spoken in 6 months, who had spoken his name as he died, who had held his hand at the end. He told them that Davian had decided, 11 days earlier, that he was going to keep the children alive at any cost, and that he had paid the cost, and that the children were alive. He told them about Maya Castellanos. He told them about a 26-year-old engineer who had built a weapon out of mining equipment, who had worked 31 hours without sleep, who had carried a photograph of her younger brother in her jacket pocket because she had not been able to send him a message in 8 days and she had needed to look at his face. He told them about the letter she had written on the 3rd night that she had not had to send. He told them that she had emerged from the tunnels on the 4th day and sat in the orange sun and cried for an hour, and then gone to teach 2 younger engineers how to defuse the charges so the children could come back to the surface safely. He paused. He looked up at the rows of delegates. He looked at the empty seat reserved for humanity. "I have been a council observer for 11 years, he said. I have visited 4 dying worlds before this one. On every one of those worlds, I documented populations that were collapsing under the weight of what was happening to them. I did this work because I was good at it, and because the council needed it done, and because I believed that there was a kind of dignity in being the witness to a species in its final hours. He paused again. I was wrong about what I was witnessing. I was wrong on Threshold 9. I am no longer certain I was correct on the 4 worlds before it. A silence settled on the chamber. This council has debated for years whether humanity should be granted a permanent seat in this chamber, he said. I understand the hesitation. I have, in the past, shared it. They are young by our standards. Their history is violent. Their technology lags ours in several areas. These are legitimate concerns. He set the folded paper on the stand. He did not open it. I want to suggest to you that we have been asking the wrong question. The question is not whether humanity has earned a seat at this table. After Threshold 9, I do not think that question is worth our time. The humans of that colony spent 12 days building a grave for a man who came to take their children, and they put him in it, and then they buried their own dead by hand, and read every name aloud, and went back to work. They did not measure the victory in what they took from him. They measured it in who survived them. By that measure, they have already won every war their species has ever fought. They are still winning the ones we do not know about. He looked at the empty seat. The question, he said, is whether we have earned the right to sit beside them. He stepped back from the stand. The chamber stayed quiet for a long time. He did not wait for the vote. He gathered his data recorder and his folded paper and walked out of the chamber, down the long pale corridor, through the wide stone doors, and out into the open air of the council world. He stood on the steps for a long moment and breathed in air that did not smell like orange dust or oil or welded metal. And he thought about Helen Ardway, who was probably back in her office by now dealing with a zoning dispute. He thought about Maya, who was probably teaching another engineer how to defuse another charge. He thought about Theo, who was probably sitting somewhere quiet, still not speaking very often, but speaking when it mattered. He thought about Davian Kell, who was buried now in the orange dust above the colony, in a small grave with his name on it, and who had told 23 children a story about a fox. The council chamber behind him erupted in sound. Voices, debate, the procedural noise of 31 species trying to agree on something difficult. He sat down on the steps. He took the folded paper out of his pocket. He opened it, finally, and read what he had written on the journey home, the 6 lines he had not used in the speech. They were not for the council. They had never been for the council. They were for him. He read them once. He folded the paper back up. He put it in his pocket. Somewhere behind him, the vote was beginning. He did not need to be in the room for it. He already knew how it was going to end. The council was finally, slowly, reluctantly, beginning to understand what humanity had built. Not in their shipyards, not in their weapons programs. Out there in the dirt and dust of a colony that should have died and had refused to. He stood up. He walked down the steps of the council building, into the long, bright afternoon, and he did not look back. The line had held. It would keep holding. That was who they were.
Helen Ardway held the line. Maya turned the mines into salvation. Davian Kell gave his life so children could live. And Ambassador Tholen Vex finally understood humanity. Not because of their weapons, but because they refused to abandon each other. And that was why Threshold 9 survived.